Good evening, everyone. I hope all are healthy and being productive at their homes. I am glad that we all have gathered here for the session on gender and professional spaces. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome our speakers, Dr. Sowjanya ma'am and Vaibab Das. Sowjanya ma'am holds a PhD in English Literature from English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad. Areas of her study are violence, caste, and gender. She is currently teaching and guiding in the School of Gender Studies at TISS Hyderabad. She teaches intersectionality, sexuality, cinema, media, and women writing for postgraduate students. She has published in various national and international journals on gender, caste, cinema, and media. Her recent papers, Politics of Intercaste Marriage Among Dalits, Political as Personal, is published in Asian Survey, University of California, Berkeley, and another paper, Whatever Happens to Jokta Joktin, Instrumentality of Religion in Non-Brahman Political Assertion and Marginalization of Dalits, has been published in the Journal of Critical Philosophy of Race, Penn State University. She regularly contributes to The Wire, Asian Age, Deccan Chronicle, The News Minute, and Roundtable India. It's great that you are here and you are going to share the knowledge with us. And now I also welcome Vaibab Das, an alumni of the School of Gender Studies, TISS Hyderabad, who is currently working with the project Nanhi Kali, a girl child education initiative for last 1 year. A staunch equal rights believer, Weber was instrumental in ensuring queer representation in bodies like ICC and Equal Opportunity Cell at TISS Hyderabad after realizing how progressive institutional spaces can also foster a culture of silence around gender and sexual identities. Weber is currently finishing his PG diploma in human rights law from NLSIU, Bangalore, and aims to work in the domain of rights, legal advocacy, and inclusive policies in near future. Thank you for joining us. I request the speaker's permission to start the session.
Yes, sure.
Okay. So the first topic of discussion here is gender dimensions at workplace and institutions. Here I request Dr. Sowjanya ma'am and Vaibab Das to throw some light on gender division of labor, stereotypes in modern professional and institutional life.
Vaibab, why don't you start it? I'll then join. It's a very broad topic.
Talk about gender operating in professional space, or the new dimensions of gendered vulnerabilities. What we need to understand that equality or equity is not something which is in tandem with the narrative of progress or development which we talk about. As we progress, there is a simplistic notion that somehow in some other way, some sort of equality, some sense of equality or equity is achieved. I think that having been a participant or a student at TISS and then going into a professional space to work, I believe this simplistic notion to be the biggest fad or lie which we have been fed in this liberal era, liberalized globalization. Because the gendered vulnerabilities, as you shift from one place to another, as progressive or as progressive it may sound, gendered vulnerabilities stay, but the manifestation, how you are made to feel vulnerable because of your gender identity or sexual identity, just changes. It still is embedded in the ethos, as in like the essence of these institutions, but the manifestation, how they affect or impact you, changes. For an example, if you go to an educational institute, it might have policies which say, like, it might comply to UGC policies which say that you cannot be bullied or harassed based on your sexual identity or sexual orientation or gender identity. But the institution in its bylaws or in its rules does not understand what are the vulnerabilities which people face who basically belong to gender minority groups. In the same way, in professional space also, when you're trying to negotiate between your learned value set or your education and a professional domain which just expects you to mind your own business, I think every day it is specifically in a development sector, it's a constant negotiation how you preserve your value set while not giving it up for the pull and ties of this professional understanding of not bringing about a change beyond your desk or beyond your cabin. Having worked, just to wrap it up, I work in a project which has 99.9% female workforce. Our entire project has 1,000 odd members, and around 980 of them are females, strong females who engage at community level, who are heading the project itself. So even when you see, like, even when you participate in a female dominated space, you see patriarchy or like sexist elements do not leave you. They just manifest in some other way where they are co-opted by people who enjoy certain range of power. That's why I will just bring it down to something which Sowjanya ma'am, Vindhya ma'am had told us long back in our first year. Gender is all about, it's manifested in who has power over whom, who has the power of narrative, who has power over your body and how you understand it. And I think that is how you start navigating gendered expressions or gender identities or gendered division of labor, what they expect you to do in professional spaces and educational spaces.
Can I take it over?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'll also try to be brief because I'm sure there are going to be many questions and very innovative thoughts from the participants who are also my students. Hi to all of you. So I want to begin with how do we understand workspace? Okay, so with ICCs and as we know, the solution of the Bhavli Devi's case, from where Saksham reports and Vishakha guidelines have brought in a very broad definition of workspace. Okay, so a workspace can be a field. A workspace at times can be a bus. Okay, can be a conveyance that you take up. For instance, that if you are in academics, if you are required to publish a paper or present a paper in a seminar, okay, so that seminar space becomes your workplace. Okay, so recently we've also seen a case of sexual harassment, even sexual molestation by a chairperson of who's a panelist in a very reputed conference, which is a feminist conference. Okay, so your workspace keeps changing. So when as I said, the workspace, I do not want to also exclude the informal workspaces. Say if a woman is working in the domestic area, like domestic sphere, where as a domestic worker, so the home where she's working becomes a workspace, right? And similarly, you would see a construction site or a agricultural field is also a space, a workspace. Okay, so this, I mean, though the Vishakha guidelines could not define it just broad, but all these spaces are also workspaces, right? So when and how the gender operates in these spaces. Okay, so firstly, we need to understand the gender, how it operates at home. It also operates the similar ways in the workspace, right? So also home is an interference into your workspace. For instance, women, like as we see recently, women in workforce, the number of women in workforce has drastically come down. What could be the probable reason? Some of the important reasons are the gendered division of labor, where the care work, child caring, taking care of the children and household work is totally on the on the shoulders of women. So it's like taking up a job in the public workforce is equivalent to doing two jobs. One is at home and the other at the workspace. Okay. So and another important factor that might have also contributed to this sudden fall of women, the number of women in the workforce also is the kind of workspaces that are privatized, that are very corporate oriented spaces where, for instance, a visibly pregnant woman would not be taken into a software industry. Okay, because a woman is considered to be anyway is going to get married, and in India, most often that you don't see motherhood as a very individual private choice. It's an enforced choice by families. So therefore, it's very obvious that women are going to reproduce. Similarly, you would also see in the agricultural sites. Okay, you would see women breastfeeding their children. So on the one hand, it is women's jobs to, like people would say that it is women's job to reproduce. And it's very natural for women to reproduce, right? But why is she reproduce? She is reproducing for the sake of the man and the patriarchy and caste system. And at the larger level, it is also a lower class woman producing another lower class child in order to provide workforce for the landlord class, right? So to that extent, it is all very interlinked, that what happens at home and in the larger society replicates in the workplace. Okay, so and you said how gender operates in the modern space is that, say, a very simple question of a woman firstly and lastly considered as a woman. Okay, so when you meet a woman in the workplace, the first question is, are you married and do you have children? So it makes a lot of difference the way the woman is understood over there. And similarly, seeing the workplace being very constructing sex as very binary, gender as very binary. As another example I can give, trans women do not have toilets, which led to many trans women, losing jobs. Right? So while this is a structural issue, but there are also issues of discrimination. A trans woman is considered to be someone who's a sex worker or a beggar and not beyond that. So one of the very prominent figure in the corporate sector once said, we can't employ beggars and sex workers as software employees, okay, software experts. So in the sense, these stereotypes determine who is there in the workspace and who is excluded in the workspace. So with that, I think I'll stop it here. We can get into the
I think I'll just follow up with just one small point to what Sowjanya ma'am said. When we also talk about gender in institutional spaces, if all of you like try to understand how we, like in current times, we have this concept of diversity and inclusion coming up in corporate spaces, in development sector. If you try to understand these diversity and inclusive policies or principles, you see that they try to build a culture which is sensitive or cognizant to gender diversity and sexual identities. That's fine. But if you see, this is also a retrogressive, to be like in layman's term, a very limited policy, because this diversity and inclusion practices generally do not enable disadvantaged sections of people like the trans community in India to access job opportunities in corporate sectors or in the development sector. So you have to also understand why we are progressing in the narrative of gender equality. The policies also which we build in name of gender equality and equity themselves institutionalize exclusion of people.
Yeah, तुमसे बात करेंगे.
Yeah, I think that's all.
अच्छा फोन पे.
Excuse me, I request all the audience members to mute their mics, please. Yeah, continue.
Yeah, I think I put forth my point. You can go on.
Yeah. Thank you for your views. Moving to the second topic of discussion, what are both of your point of views and experiences on sexual harassment, abuse, and intersectionality of caste, class, gender at institution, at work, and level? So anyone can start. I think,
So,
ma'am.
I mean, do I need to? I mean, I don't think I need to define sexual harassment, and almost all of you might have read ICC guidelines, Vishaka guidelines of Saksham report. So I'll just give a brief introduction to it. Bhavri Devi's case, okay, was the milestone case that led to finally, getting the legislation of ICC. Okay, so Bhavri Devi was a Satin working in the village where she's a woman worker basically, and in the village she prevented. Her job is to prevent the child marriages, and she prevented the child marriage, one of the child marriages that was taking place in the village. And the village landlords, who are landlord caste, like forward caste and landowning community, were, angered by this prevention of a child marriage from their community. And when she was working in the field, she was raped in front of her husband. Okay, so this was the case with the women's movement, intervention of women's movement, where women's groups had had brought various changes in the definition of workspace, and second the what is sexual harassment. Okay, and in this very case there is a very clear dimension of caste. But in Vishaka guidelines or ICC guidelines that we have today, we don't see caste angle. Okay, that glaring form of caste angle, though many members of ICC are very sensitive to this caste angle. But it is also like, coming from one's own learning as academics and all. I'm not sure so far in other industries, other kind of workspaces, like say corporate world, how often you have ICC members who are also caste sensitive or sensitive to various intersectionalities in our society. Okay, so sexual harassment is a very, very prevalent, aspect of our workspaces. So, coming from a village to a small town to a urban city, I can relate to how many women might have been pushed out of the workspaces, which is also educational spaces. Educational spaces are also workspaces due to sexual harassment. Is one thing I very distinctly remember in my childhood as a student of class 6, not beyond this. Okay, so a girl who was my classmate, who had to travel from outskirts to the school. Okay, due to the prevalence of sexual harassment on the way to school. The first case I have noticed, a girl has been stopped from her education. Okay, so from there we would see today, like recently, I've been also a bit disturbed by the fact that among the TISS, okay, students of TISS campus, I mean, I've been only observing mostly Hyderabad campus, where a lot of men and women, it's not just men, it's not just women, also men, complaining against sexual harassment, and their also inability to call out or approach the ICCs has actually impacted me a lot on how to rethink ICCs, how to rethink the mechanisms, how to rethink our own sensitivities. So one of which is how do we understand intersectionalities here? So we have majorly, I will not talk much on race, but I will start with caste as one intersectionality. Sexuality is another major intersectionality. and gender, as we all know. So, and class as another intersectionality, which also has very close linkages with caste system. These are the intersectionalities that play a vital role in sexual harassment. Okay, but sexual harassment, on the one hand, you have to go by guidelines. Okay, so what is sexual harassment? What is not sexual harassment? And on the other hand, you also need to apply these lenses of caste, class, and gender sexuality. Okay, so in the sense, there is certain conflict I see, especially in the past few cases that came up on social media, because I cannot negate these cases, given the fact that we do not have mechanisms maybe in place, but we do not have socio-political conditions in which women could call out. So I do not neglect the social media calls. Okay, social media calling out of the sexual harassment in workspace, because we do not have a socio-political and cultural space where women can, without any fear of consequences, complain and get a sense of justice, right? So in this, one is the intersectionality of caste, which became very vibrant in the discussions of sexual harassment. It's a very complex intersectionality, because I see this conflict not between the Dalit women and the caste Hindu men. Okay, which is traditionally very humongously there, the conflict of sexual harassment, okay, sexual violence perpetuated by the caste Hindu man on the Dalit woman. Okay, this is the traditional set, as we know. So, if you see in the late 90s, the case of Sunita in Hyderabad Central University, where a caste Hindu man, the landlord caste man, who sexually exploited a Dalit woman, which led to the Dalit woman's suicide, which is not a very well-known case like Rohit Vemula for various gender dimensions and the very ideology of larger Dalit movement and all. Also the media, like at that time, social media was not, there was no social media revolution, so people do not know this case. Okay, but some of you might have heard of it, where a Dalit woman being, sexually exploited and killed herself on the campus. So this is a very clear case of a very dominant, gender-dominant caste person sexually harassing a Dalit woman who is by all means powerless in that spectrum of caste, class, and gender. But today the conflict is more between the Dalit man versus the caste Hindu woman, and the Dalit man versus the versus any a gay person or or a trans woman. Okay, so why this conflict is high? Why this conflict has emerged is, there is a very unilateral understanding of unidimensional understanding of a Dalit woman, Dalit man by all means a victim. Okay, a Dalit man is at the receiving end of oppression, and the caste Hindu woman is at the has a very clear privilege, and this is a problem, I would say, because see, power structures are very flexible. Okay, the power dimension has to be understood with its uniqueness and the nuances that operate at a given time and space. Otherwise, you will fail to understand. You will have one dimension of Dalit man is as a victim, and the caste Hindu woman as the oppressor or the privileged at least, right? So my question here is, the conflict arises here because there is no conflict we see between Dalit man and the caste Hindu man. There is a caste dimension. Okay, but in terms of gender and sexual harassment, you don't see that kind of dimension between the caste Hindu man, Brahmin man, and the Dalit man. But it is between the Brahmin woman and the Dalit man. Why? Because say, here is the Dalit man, by all means, yes, coming from an oppressed community, by oppressed by the caste and class, at times also the regionality of, being urban and rural, all that. And this man, how his power should be understood in relation to a very privileged gay person, or a very privileged trans woman, or a very privileged upper class urban caste Hindu woman. Is here the question is, he may be a Dalit, but he is a heterosexual man. Okay, so his question, the conflict arises from, so I may be a Dalit, but what about my manhood? That's where the question of, a Dalit man, a kind of forcing a caste Hindu woman to wash the plates in order to compensate for the 20, what is that, 2000 years of oppression. Okay, a Dalit man is not able to ask, or not able to make a Brahmin man to wash his plate, but a Brahmin woman to wash his plate, right? And a Dalit man, his conflict again is that I may be a Dalit, but I'm a heterosexual man. After all, you are, gay man with no masculinity, because masculinity is always understood as heterosexual masculinity. Okay, so what about my power? Like, one is that yes, I do not have any privileges, but I also have a privilege of being a heterosexual masculine person. And what happens to that? Won't you respect it? Can I not have a power, derived from that structure? Is the conflict that arises when a Dalit person, when a Dalit heterosexual man is sexually harassing a trans woman, sexually harassing a gay person. Okay, and also you need to understand what the dynamics between Dalit men and women. How is it operating? Okay, so and mostly, queer sexuality, people from queer sexuality are generally, or I would say most often, fall prey to sexual harassment at workplace. Not merely workplace, but if you go to a doctor may molest. Okay, if you go to a class, a teacher, a fellow classmate. Okay, anybody will be a position to kind of sexually harass this person, because the very structure of heteronormativity, the very structure of it being heterosexual gives a lot of power. That itself is another power structure in the intersectionalities that we have. We can't say only caste is a structure, but also heteronormativity is a larger, very glaring structure that we see around us.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much, ma'am. Vaibhav, you can put in your points. You are muted. You're muted.
I think I just have 2 quick points because Sowjanya ma'am covered everything in length and breadth. I believe I just to elaborate on what ma'am had said like few minutes ago, like this idea of a man being a victim. So like this concept of victimhood itself faces so much of problem when we articulate masculinity, because within masculinity itself, the victimhood doesn't fit in. The moment you are called a victim, or the moment you even attempt to realize that you have been harassed or abused, and the source of the harassment is based on your gender identity or sexual orientation, in some way, your masculinity, like your manhood, invariably gets questioned when you think that, should I approach institutional processes? Should I approach avenues to get my problem redressed? Because the moment people get to know that I have been harassed or victimized based on my gender identity or sexual orientation, in some understanding of gender, I'm losing my my man, what we articulate as manness, or like the identity of the Indian man who is supposed to be like all virile and strong and subservient. Also, to talk about how queer people engage with sexual harassment and abuse, I think to explain in just one line, law at this given time in India has not developed to understand the experiences which queer people face with respect to sexual harassment and abuse. Because all the 26 cases which you, if any one of you has time, if you go and just search on web, all the 26 cases which are pending in various high courts in India, one major trend which you will see in all those judgments is that the judges try to or attempt to understand our harassment or our abuse within the gender binary, because the law, the given law, understands laws are gender specific. So it becomes very difficult. And I think nowadays what we are seeing is a scenario where harassment happens between a man and man. Because just sharing from my personal experience, I have been a part of this Hyderabad. And I understand how this idea of subordinate masculinity operates, like how you are a lesser man in comparison to other like masculine ideas which walk and talk in the society. If you do not project certain gender roles, if you do not comply to certain gender expectations, you become a vessel. You are an easy target to be ridiculed. You are an easy target to be labeled. You are an easy target to be made an example of. And when you are made an example of based on your gender identity and sexual orientation, there you experience forms of harassment and abuse which no ICC guideline or the sexual harassment policies of any progressive institution can understand your predicament. I personally have confronted with teachers, like ma'am is also a privy to it. There's certain things which law doesn't understand, and you have to like tell yourself, like, I survived today, I'll face another day, because I don't have a safeguard available as of now. So I think in between this victimhood and masculinity, subordinate masculinity, and of course, there is always this idea that queer people, as our identity is rooted in our sexuality, we are very loose. Like you can easily hypersexualize us, and if we become a victim of sexual abuse or sexual harassment, we have a big role to play with like role to play in our own harassment and abuse. So these are certain guiding things which always revolve around our head when we negotiate between sexual harassment, abuse, and institutional redressal mechanisms. I think these are the two cents I wanted to add to what ma'am said earlier on.
Okay. So thank you for giving your viewpoints on how things go on. I think the second topic that I wanted to discuss was grievance redressal and complaint mechanism, which Vaibhav already took a little bit. So I would like ma'am to contribute on the same topic, being grievance redressal and complaint mechanism at workplace, or a little more about how ICC works and what are the issues around it.
Okay. So I have to talk about another evolution of GS Cash to first Cash to GS Cash to ICCs. Okay. So the Cash was the Committee Against Sexual Harassment. GS Cash, they added GS as gender sensitization also as part of their work, their agenda. And then ICC's internal committee. Then there's something else. It's just IC now, right? RCC, something like that. Okay, so there is this whole evolution. One thing I would say, there were many. See, it was just the Supreme Court directive for a long time to have an ICC in each workspace where there are women workers. Okay. And it is also like, for ICC, it's more or less very gender binary understanding of, people. So in this context, not all institutes have imparted ICCs. And secondly, ICC is in place doesn't mean women will be able to very easily complain without having any repercussions of complaining or calling out sexual harassment, because we live in a kind of culture where a woman is never believed at a very first instance. Okay, a woman is always treated as a secondary citizen, and second sex. But I understand. Again, we have also intersectionalities of, say, a Dalit man may not be easily believed, or Dalit man also may face discrimination at workplace on the basis of caste, on the basis of class. But ICCs, by just being there, it may not ensure the gender sensitive workspace. Okay. And secondly, the workspaces still see the people as men and women. Okay, heterosexual men and heterosexual women. They do not see as they do not refer to us as people with different sexual orientations and people with different genders, like one may be a trans woman, trans man, trans boy. So these genders and sexualities do not often figure in the idea of the people that we have around us. So therefore, most often that we also see the a gay men complaint is taken as not very significant, not very important, because after all, the man is man and the gay man is also man over there. Okay. So then women, while calling out, women are constructed at the very first instance as a troublemaker, cannot take anything, a troublemaker all the time, creating troubles in the workspace and cannot be. And second is that she might have had a role in the, it's like, abetting one's own rape. Women have been constructed initially as abetting one's own rape, right? In some countries, still abetting one's own rape is there. So therefore, women are constructed to be, they abet their own rape. In a sense, why she might have gotten into this relationship? Why is she dressing herself up in this way? Even the people at caste, even the professors who are members of caste, members of ICCs might have asked these questions very much to the students. Why a woman is dressing up in this manner, which is very provocative to me. So, which is again coming from the very Brahminic idea of, Manu says that it is women who are flirtatious, women who are evil, women who are adulterous, and women are the reason for the desire in man. Okay, man is not the reason. Okay, it is the woman who is the reason. So, this Brahminic ideology is one obstruction that, women are very scared to complain, very, they fear the consequences of being called as troublemakers, and also have to face a lot of character assassination in future. Okay, so at times what happens is that your right to complain, call out sexual harassment as a news travels before you, that you are applying elsewhere in a university, and the university admin comes to know that you have once complained at ICC, but you may not take anything easy, that you may create troubles. Okay, it's very tough because it's like, again, it's very heterosexual caste Hindu male society that thinks in this way, that women have to take some kind of should be able to put up with some kind of sexual harassment when it doesn't cross limits. Okay, I'll give you one example that when we were going to some of these conferences, men come brush past against us and lasting shake hand, that that it is sexual harassment. Okay, and somebody staring at you also amounts to sexual harassment, is what you know. But if you actually complain all this, you will have to every day sit in the ICC room and not, you won't be able to do your work. So to that extent, there are various aspects and levels and degrees of sexual harassment. I am not saying that you should overlook or condone any, minor acts of sexual harassment. I'm not even categorizing in that way as minor and major. But the thing is, there are some practical issues to deal with this kind of sexual harassment, because we do not have mechanisms where you have totally zero, you will be able to keep your foot down and say you have zero tolerance to any kind of sexual harassment. Okay, and many times the consequences for women, repercussions for women are higher than for the men, because another man who might very easily, like I know, men. I'm not particularly talking about anybody. There are men who are very accommodative of sexual harassment. Okay, there are men who are very readily giving them jobs. There are not people readily taking up a survivor, giving a job for a survivor, but for a sexual harasser, for a sexual predator, there is enormous support, because after all, the idea of sexual harassment or a complaint is shaking the very foundations of gender, foundations of caste. Yeah.
Now, what we can do is moving to the last topic of the session. I'll club certain questions also from the audience in that. So, the question is, how can people become and generate awareness around being gender sensitive and conscious at workplace and institutions? And addressing certain questions around it from the audience, people asked about how while the paid maternity leave and period leave is being essential at specific workplaces, doesn't it make companies or institutions very much aware that women should not be included as the part of or the member of their company? And how because of the culture of working from home, the certain criteria or the certain problems that women are facing nowadays because of lack of a helper also, and the home space not being so much gender inclusive. So taking all these discussions or the questions from the audience, we would like ma'am and Vaibhav to talk about gender awareness, gender sensitivity, and being conscious at workplace and institution about gender.
Shall I start?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Okay, so understanding gender in India, okay, in our society, is very complex. I would begin with, because it has various intricate patterns. It is also been intervened or interlinked to various other social dimensions of caste, class, sexuality, as I said, and disability. So, in this context, how to be gender sensitive? Firstly, we need, let's see, I always go back to the very fundamental questions. Why there is sexual harassment? If you ask me, it originates from patriarchy. And patriarchy in India is very closely linked up to, or I would say, is supported by caste system. Okay, it's like both caste and patriarchy kind of support each other, and without the support of patriarchy, caste cannot sustain. So therefore, caste and gender are very friendly, friendly social structures that we need to really accept it. So in this context, sexual harassment is an ideology that comes from this Brahminical, patriarchy, where the Brahmin and the caste Hindu men uh, have two important functions. So one is a function, but the other one is a kind of privilege that man enjoys. So along with control over private property, he also controls his women in order to reproduce the caste pure offspring. And he also has access to women outside this structure of marriage. Okay, so if anyone thinks that in India, marriage is a monogamous institution, it is totally wrong. Because monogamy is only meant for women of particular caste groups. Okay, man will either have, as also Engels talks about, men in any society will either have a open polygamy or concealed polygamy. So before 1955, we had open polygamy. Various communities in India had first wife, second wife, as you know, Chinnavidu. Chinnavidu in Tamil means a small house. Okay, small house is the second wife. So all noble men, all royal men, all men of, men who belong to dominant caste used to definitely have a second wife, which is concubinage also. So before 1955, the Anglo-Saxon jurisprudence, interfered with our marriage, Hindu Marriage Act, Hindu code system. We had a very open polygamy. Men have polygamous relationships: wife, concubine, second wife, yogini, or devdasi, or sex worker. So various accesses that he has, and also Dalit women at workplace. Okay, and on the other hand, women from his community, he wants to have total entitlement and control over that, and also entitlement over the labor of the lower class caste. So what is missing here is that the Dalit man or the lower caste man having an access to the caste Hindu women or the upper caste women. So this, as we say that, what are we fighting today is for the consensual access, not for non-consensual access. So I'll try to explain this. See, if a Dalit man sexually harasses an upper caste woman and says that Brahmin man has historically sexually harassed Dalit women, so why not Dalit man sexually harass caste women? See, our democratic fight is not about having a non-consensual relation, non-consensual access, but for a Dalit man to the caste Hindu. We are fighting for the consensual access, in the sense when a caste Hindu woman wants to marry or enter into any kind of conjugality, any form of intimacy with the Dalit man, and that right of both that caste Hindu woman and the Dalit man is what we are protecting and fighting for, right? So the case of Kaushalya in Tamil Nadu, who married Shankar, who is a Dalit man, and Dalit man has been killed in the name of honor. Okay, so this we condemn. But it doesn't mean that Dalit politics means Dalit man would have to imitate the Brahmin man. Yes, Brahminism is, rape culture originates from Brahminism. Yes. But if a Dalit man wants to be a Brahmin man and imitate a Brahmin man and have even the non-consensual access to the caste Hindu woman or with a Dalit woman and wants to sexually harass or rape, then we only have the Dalit movement may end up bringing more Brahmin men into the world, right? It's like Bell Hooks says that to feminist movement or the women's movement, if white women want to imitate white men, we will end up having more number of men around. Okay, so similarly, so when a Dalit man sexually harasses a caste Hindu woman, okay, it doesn't mean only this way happens. Caste Hindu man, by all means, have a larger, very strong power, okay, over Dalit women. Okay, but this is kind of very, I would say, invisibilized, or it's obscured in some sense. But what is more glaringly existing here is the conflict between the Dalit man sexually harassing the caste Hindu. So the first thing is that the conflict is that the caste Hindu woman has the privilege of caste. How could she complain in the ICC against a Dalit man? Okay. Firstly, if a Dalit man categorically doesn't have any power, he wouldn't have sexually harassed you first. If he had sexually harassed you, there is some power that is operating against you, and you need to have a check and balances of that power. You need to unravel that power, understand that power. What gives power to a Dalit man to sexually harass a caste Hindu? This is heterosexual masculinity. To some extent, maybe the imitation of the Brahminism. So I would say Brahminical culture is all about whose women and who can be accessed and who cannot be accessed. So therefore, as long as women are constructed as extensions of family groups, families, caste groups, and communities, the rape is inevitable. Okay, only when women are constructed as autonomous, a woman is autonomous, and which we call bodily injury. Okay, Bodily integrity means apart from you, no one else has any power over, authority over your body. You are the sole authoritative figure over your body. And then you call yourself that you have bodily. And as long as this bodily integrity is not unraveled and understood by people, sexual harassment will still be a huge struggle for all of us. Okay, and sexual harassment is not just there in workplace. Okay, I don't want to deviate the topic because you have actually given me a topic to discuss on sexual harassment in workplace. But sexual harassment takes place at home also. So why it takes place is, one, because of the caste system, Brahminism. Secondly, because one doesn't respect the bodily autonomy or the bodily integrity of both men and women, not just women, but also men. So, and finally, the to be sensitive to sexual harassment or to be sensitive at workplace is to acknowledge that men and women are not the only genders that we have. And heteronormativity is not the only sexuality that we have. With that, I think I stop because
Thank you so much, ma'am. So, Vaibhav, I would like you to touch upon certain initiatives that maybe you've taken during your journey into ISS and your workplace, and what could be the ways that we, as beings or as part of TISS or as students, can make the space more gender sensitive. Also, I'm clubbing another a question which one of the audience asked is, victims themselves somewhere don't want to face the consequences of calling out the sexual harassment. So what do you think can be the forums for expression that can give same importance and can let the victim talk about it, or the person?
Okay.
Yeah.
A lot of questions in a single go, but I'll try to answer all of them. I think most of us who are on this call, we have been a student or like a faculty or a participant in TISS. And I know the 2 years or the 5 years at TISS are like a hell of a journey. Like you learn, unlearn a lot of things. What I would like to elaborate on with my experience with TISS is, like when you try to engage with harassment or abuse, it's not a simple path, because first of all, you enter such a diverse space where the institute itself attempts to make sure there is a threshold diversity coming to an educational space, that navigating bodily integrity and like the idea of what is wrong, what is acceptable, and what is not becomes a question of political correctness. And this idea of political correctness is something which goes on in young minds, like specifically me being a student, having been a student at this, I know this idea hovers around our brain for a large part of time, which till year 2, when we start unlearning and letting go of these structural ideas in our head. TISS Hyderabad, I'll take an example of TISS Hyderabad because that's my limited knowledge. The moment I entered, we already had institutions like ICC and SPC. There was a special protection cell. I remember how toxic the environment was, because the moment you enter it, on one hand, on the pen and paper in the manual, like handbook or manual, whatever we call it, you see that these are institutional mechanisms to ensure that you are protected against any harassment or abuse, or no one can make you feel inferior to your being or to your own existence or your idea of self-image. What happens is that the politics of an institute or the groups which participate in an educational space is so complex that they valorize these institutions. If any one of you must be like keeping a trace of the recent happenings, you will see participants or position, like people who have a ring or have a say in these bodies, valorize these bodies as a sense of impunity. I am a member of ICC, I have a certain degree of impunity, and this space or mechanism becomes inaccessible to you. I think there was a sizable number of people, including me, who faced a certain degree of harassment, and harassment, not the textbook definition of harassment. Harassment happens in diverse ways which are not understood by law. I remember towards the end of my second year when I was in TISS, suddenly, like on the second last day of placement, people started passively ignoring me. Like if they had some work to be done, they will tell the junior who was standing next to me that, okay, I am next, you are supposed to do, but they will not tell me because they are disgusted. Like because within their politics, like queer person or a gay man existing there doesn't fit into their politics. It questions their masculine understanding of progressive politics and so on. And these people and these students do it because they have certain institutional structure to fall back to, because they know that someone at the end of the day will come to their rescue. I remember in the second year when we were trying to make a queer collective, and I was petitioning the management committee of TISS Hyderabad every now and then. Uh, Dear sweet old Shivaraju sir, I don't know how many mails I must have bombarded him with. I remember how it was also a tussle to get a reservation in spaces like SPC or ICC for people belonging to gender minority identities or sexual identities which do not fit between the heteronormative understanding, because the institution believed, or specifically the cell believed, that you are not a vulnerable group, you are not a minority if you do not fit into the recognized categories like the caste or class, which predominantly fits into the working operational definition of SPC. So we had to fought our way through in, and we had to like restructure SPC as an equal opportunities cell to ensure that the institution, which has a school of gender studies, wakes up to the idea that how gender and sexuality can be used to subjugate people, harass people, and abuse people. So it was a long way. Like even institutions uh, who specialize in social sciences refer to us as, okay, these people create a lot of problem. The moment you hear these people, you understand there is this otherization. You are not part of the establishment, you are challenging it. This is what ma'am was referring to in the English law, Anglo-Saxon law. We got criminalized. Trans community members got criminalized because they wore their gender on their body. They explicitly defied the English rule by wearing their gender on their bodies. They performed their gender, and through that act of performance itself, it was understood that these people are not gonna fall, like trans members in the society are not gonna toe the line of what is the normal or what is the rule. They will not fit into the civilized society, and that's why they were criminalized through Criminal Tribes Act, CTA, and that has percolated. It got repelled, but it has percolated. If you go to any nearby police station, you ask them about transgender members of the society, they're like, oh, nuisance creating people, sex workers, always in trouble, pick up street fights. These are the ideas. They are relegated as second class citizens. I believe I saw a question in the chat like how law has been exclusive. Law is by itself exclusive because it doesn't understand anything beyond the heteronormative binary. Nalsa judgment was considered to be a landmark judgment. If all of you go and read the 14 operative clauses given by the two judges, it will be clearly visible that they have also not understood the trans identity, where they have said self-determination becomes is the principle behind identifying your gender identity. Both of them have in a later clause gone on to say that everyone beyond the idea of heterosexual male and female are transgender persons. So they have also given contradictory opinion because it is a structural understanding that law in its current form cannot understand the vulnerabilities of gender minorities and sexual minorities in India. That is what constitutes the exclusionary language of law in itself. And it also percolates or goes on to corporate organizations or development sector organizations where you cannot even have a queer conversation, like to talk about whether the company has, there is this hush method. They will never tell you they are a queer friendly organization or not. HR will very stumbly tell you we have gender neutral laws when it comes to sexual harassment, basically saying that okay, whenever a situation will come up, we will deal with it as a fix gap measure. We don't have institutional measure to ensure that there is certain understanding. So I'll just wrap it up by saying in institutional spaces, there is a severe lack of information. Forget sensitivity, forget affirmative steps. The information, we believe the information is there. Everyone knows about queer identities, sexual orientations, and its manifestation. No, it, like, there is a big void, specifically in development sector, which deals with communities, grassroots level uh, grassroots level activities and so on. Even in the development sector, we are plagued by an understanding of how gender and sexuality operates, and we
Uh,
don't
yeah,
norms.
yeah.
I'll just wrap.
Vaibhav,
Yeah.
sorry to, but can you like, talk in 2-3 lines about how to create a platform for expressions which is away or apart from the formal mechanisms that exist? So that, just little hint or little idea of how we as students or how we as an institute on social sciences can create a platform. We do not directly include ICC or other things, but having a formal area of gender sensitiveness. So
I think I think this conversation about gender equality or having a safe space for around discussion around gender identity and sexual orientation needs to go beyond the ideas of ICC. You don't need to have a ICC in place to like start thinking about how to create a safe space. And I think there the idea comes in how we engage with gender issues in the first place, because there are also people, like there is a very unexplored part when we talk about gender studies is how do we make men engage with gender, how do we make intersectional men engage with gender, how does like intersectional women engage with gender, and where how do we collectively engage with queer identities. It's so diverse in institutional space. First of all, I think there needs to be this common understanding about I think it can be in form of before the session begins or the academic session begins. I think instead of a unidirectional conveyance that these are the rules of the orientation sessions, I think the orientation session itself needs to set a tempo that how this institution expects or like believes in enshrining the idea that it is a safe space for intersectional identities. Of course, whenever you have diverse set of people coming together, there will be friction, there will be social phenomena which will be abusive and subjugating for others. So how do you engage, like to be very unapologetic, I have been a person who has been a staunch believer of uh, bombarding the institution every now and then to ensure that they don't take your bodily integrity and self dignity for granted. Because when you experience sexual harassment or abuse or belittling or bullying, they are not attacking just you. You become a medium to set example that they can trample upon your dignity or they can trample upon your rights just because you are easy, just because you fit the definition of a perfect victim. So I think you need to engage with the institution because the institution bends as much as the student makes them bend. So once, like it was a one step up, like one step at a time, you get reservations in these bodies. The next step you take, like you have a very functional to a collective or collective student collectives completely.
can you also include 1-2 examples from your workplace where you're currently working?
From my workplace, I think my workplace itself is a very bad example, like this, like how we have engaged with gender and sexual orientation. I remember how when the first month I entered my job, I was like made to feel very uncomfortable. I felt like I was borderline harassed over a call by a female employee who was like senior to me. And when I raised it with the HR was like, how can you face harassment? Are you sure? Do you know what I did? I had to send them a 41-minute of recording of the call for them to believe that something like that happened, because it was beyond their idea that something can happen to a male, and that to a new joinee by a senior executive. So I think the first attempt to ensure that these conversations don't die is to be on a guard. Like you have to be very very self-aware, because we come from a certain threshold education which equips us that we will be self-reliant to a degree where we can ensure that we have access to certain redressal mechanisms, or else they will push you under the carpet totally. And beyond that also, I think I was discussing with both of you last day, like it's also a unique aspect how men in the development sector engage in projects which are centric on female healthcare, female education, and so on. I think when men, like nowadays we are seeing an increase in number of men who are like participating in social work or in the development sector at a grassroots level. I think the most important thing which they need to understand, they have to, more than their education, they have to harp on their value sets. What, like I have been using this word very like often in this webinar. Value set is some core elements which you take from like your upbringing, you take from your education, and you evolve your identity around it, and you ensure that you don't lose them, come what may. And I think these things you need to harp on while you engage, how to engage with issues of gender, respect, mutual respectability, and how to navigate these spaces where like no one knows. You can be like, you can be victimized, or you can be in a position to perpetrate harassment or abuse even without knowing that you are coming across as uneasy or probably harassing someone without knowing. So I think that is how we can engage with gender harassment and abuse at workplace and in educational spaces like this, Hyderabad specifically. I'm sure like Sowjanya ma'am will
Yeah, I
on
thank you
that.
so much for the views that you shared with us. And now, Sojana ma'am, we would like to hear like 2-3 lines on how we can make the institution and workplace a little bit gender sensitive. Your point of views on this.
uh, I will uh, I will talk more about academic spaces here.
Okay, ma'am. Sure.
So academic spaces, or even the political spaces outside the academic spaces, have been very exclusionary in the way it addresses the issues of discrimination. Okay, see, we have political groups in the institute, and each group has compartmentalized what their agenda is. So the society is not viewed as a larger complex society. As I always say, we live in ultra complex society, like very, very complex society. And it's not very easy to understand its intricate patterns or unravel its social structures. In such a context, when you have a political group, why is it concentrating exclusively on one particular social structure that is intricately linked up to all other social structures? For instance, you have a left group, and the left group is exclusively looking at class, and it doesn't have gender. So, class has no gender in India. Class has gender in it. So, as women's studies for that matter, women's studies group is used to be seen as some cornered, a space where women from the urban middle classes come here to study. So this was the kind of stigma that women's studies faced for a long time. I'm sure that has been undone now. I feel that has been undone a lot. So if you see a Dalit group, okay, exclusively calls caste as the form of discrimination they want to fight. So among the Dalits, there won't be any women. There will be women, right? But it only says that our agenda only is about caste, exclusive. Okay. And again, the groups like queer collectives. I mean, I'm not talking about any particular queer collectives all over. So the queer collectives come up to say that we only fight for queer communities, and we fight against, ours is a group that is a political statement against the discrimination faced by queer collective, which is very, very welcome, wonderful, and there is nothing wrong in it. I'm not criticizing that aspect, but won't the group members have class and caste in it? Certainly, yes. So therefore, we cannot compartmentalize caste, class, gender, and sexuality, at least to that extent. Again, issues of, there are also like other minor structures. I won't say minor, but there are also other important structures like, say, visibility or, or something like regionality. All that comes much later. But firstly, at least, if you can't recognize caste, class, gender, and sexuality as interlinked, what happens is it leads to exclusion. Okay, so where are the Dalit queer people in this world? So there is no sexuality for Dalits. So all Dalits are heterosexuals. No. So therefore, the queer community is saying that we do not talk about caste here. Please excuse us. It's not about caste. It's all about only sexuality. But it is kind of dominated by the very privileged upper class people. Upper class is also upper caste. And at the same time, a Dalit group, when you go and you say you're a queer Dalit person, and let us also talk about the discrimination faced. The Dalit movement is saying, no, we don't have sexuality. We are all about heteronormativity. So we all are heteronormative men, and who are going to fight exclusively caste system in isolation. But the oxymoronic, idea here is that caste cannot be fought in isolation, and class cannot be understood in India without caste. Okay, and all these factors, all these sociological factors are linked up to heteronormativity. Without heteronormativity, there is no caste. You know that. So if there is no heteronormative, heterosexual, caste endogamous marriage, where is caste? There is no caste. So it is linked up to heteronormativity, and heteronormativity is linked up to reproduction. Reproduction is linked up to caste system. Caste is linked up to class. It determines, the caste-based division of labor determines which class do I belong to. So therefore, this compartmentalization should be ended. And
Yes.
all groups should be equally caste sensitive, class sensitive, also gender sensitive.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I think it covered a lot about intersectionality and how we can be more inclusive when we're talking about gender spaces, and when we're talking about making spaces in institution and workplace very much gender sensitive and gender conscious. So I think we had a very great session with Dr. Sowjanya ma'am and Vaibab, and I would like to thank both of them for giving us their time and sharing their knowledge with us. And I also appreciate the patience of the audience and the questions that we received from them. At last, I would also like to thank the MyTISS team for making the session successful. I think we'll be sharing the whole session on the social medias that are linked to MyTISS. So I would like people to look forward and also share the recorded session with other people. So we hope for more participation for the next episode of Sunday Samvad, and I think here we end, and I hope all of you have a great day ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Drishti. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much.